It's a week since a burglary in Hither Green in London, which resulted in the death of a burglar, Henry Vincent, killed apparently after a screwdriver he was carrying was used on him by the victim of the raid. What has made the death more noteworthy is the row which has raged since over the placing of flowers at the house of Richard Osborne Brooks by friends and family of Vincent. Flowers which have then been pulled down and binned repeatedly, often in the midst of furious words on both sides, resulting in attempts by the police to keep the peace. Flowers for the dead. It's a feature of modern life, at the edge of roads where people have died in accidents, at the scene of fatal fires, and at the site of atrocities. Their presence is hardly ever controversial, but a floral memorial in Hither Green in London has created a febrile atmosphere which appears only to be intensifying.
Flowers.
Police have been a regular presence on the street, and the Met's Deputy Commissioner even said the row had put a strain on the force.
Would you just like to give a message to people who tore it down?
Scum, can't leave the floor.
You know how your Converse family are?
78-year-old Richard Osborne Brooks, who confronted Henry Vincent when he and an accomplice entered the house, was arrested on suspicion of murder but later released without charge. He and his wife have yet to return to the house they have lived in for decades. But should mourners be free to commemorate Vincent's death at the scene where he committed a crime, especially if the victims of that crime may be too intimidated to go back home? Well, joining me now is novelist and broadcaster Anne Atkins, and in Washington, D.C., the editor-in-chief of Breitbart London, Rahim Kassam. Good evening to you both. First of all, Anne Atkins, the Osborne Brooks went through a terrifying ordeal, and they were put through that by Henry Vincent and one other. And yet the tributes to him are right outside their door. Do you recognise that that could be incredibly upsetting, if not even offensive, for the family in that house?
Yes, but heaven forbid, Kirsty, that when you and I are bereaved, that we should be judged on how we react in the first few days of our bereavement. It's a terribly difficult time. And what kind of person do you have to be to tear down a teddy from children who've lost their daddy, who say, "Daddy, I love you," to my daddy? I mean, you know, come on. Well, OK, of course their father should not have been burgling houses. Of course we all know that. But it's not the children's fault, is it? Now,
if the Osborne Brooks had died in that raid as well, would you take the same view of tributes to Henry Vincent outside?
I think when you've lost your daddy, you are allowed to leave a teddy and some flowers and some balloons at the place where he died.
Rahim Kassam, is that your view, that actually for a child, losing a father, incredibly traumatic, and actually if it helps them with the acknowledgement of what has happened to leave flowers outside the house that he burgled, what is the harm in that?
Well, I think there is harm. There is harm in several aspects of this. I think, you know, when you look at it, you look and you see the word offence that you used in the sort of introduction to this. I don't think we should be judging these things on terms of offence caused, or rather offence taken by anyone. You look at the public polling on this, 82% say it should not be allowed to happen. But again, I don't think that is how we should be judging something like this. Your other guest asked the question, what kind of person would tear down flowers, teddy bears, etc., left for the commemoration of a burglar's life who did invade and who did infringe upon the rights of someone else? I'll tell you what kind of person I would. A lot of the other people in that who were polled, that 82% would. And I think what it comes down to is a basic concept of morality here. This is not a road traffic accident that occurred. This is not a terrorist attack that occurred. We are not grieving the life of somebody who was an innocent bystander. If the family want to grieve the loss of their loved one, and I can understand that it was a loved one, then they should do so somewhere else, not somewhere where it can be seen to be a taunt or even an intimidation tactic against the would have been victims of this midnight home invasion.
And indeed, the Osborne brothers have not returned home yet. Now, we don't know whether it's because they're too scared to return home, but they certainly haven't returned home, a home to which they were attached for decades.
Okay, sure, and if there is a case of intimidation, that's a totally separate matter, and that should not be allowed, and it's not allowed. It is against the law to intimidate people, and, you know, but that isn't... that isn't part of leaving flowers. You know, leaving flowers at the place where somebody has died is not an act of intimidation normally. It's not how it's normally interpreted. Interestingly enough, by pure coincidence, my daughter and son-in-law lived 2 or 3 streets away from where this happened. My daughter encountered a violent burglar, so she's been through this. I've been mugged. It's a scary thing to happen, but it is not nearly as traumatic. It's not even the same league as growing up without your father. Now, whatever the rights and wrongs
there was
of this,
violence done to the husband. You know,
nobody's condoning that.
Well, no, actually, hang on. The burglars and a screwdriver, it could very seriously have. You know, the intent was not just to knock on the door and say, "Could I have a couple of quid?"
That's as may be. But the family has still, the children have still been deprived of their father. They've got to grow up for the next 20 years without their father. That is a terrible thing.
Well,
for
Raheem,
goodness sake, a few flowers.
If the children feel that is the place where they want to remember their father, the place where he fell, that is a legitimate desire, is it not?
Well, I think it's a legitimate desire, but we don't all act on our desires. We take into account other people's considerations. We live in a community. We don't live in isolation trying to fulfill all of our most basic desires. I might be controversial in saying this as well, but the bereavement of a father who may have taught their children criminality is something that we need to assess as well. Perhaps these children would be better off not having a criminal father around teaching them the tools of the trade, and for the police to try to be enforcing the fact that these people can lay flowers out there. I think it's the policing of immorality here. I think it's the enforcement of immorality, the enforcement of depravity, and the enforcement of criminality.
Well, let's see how this.
To say that these children are better off without their father is a
You don't know. Do you know them?
Thing to say.
Do you know them?
Thank you both very much, Neil and Faye. We'll have to end it there. That's just about it for tonight. But before